applications, use cases of AI adoption in multiple industries. We've seen previously some great sessions on AI in CPG and retail, banking and insurance. The last week we had a great session on AI in manufacturing. And this week we have a very interesting session with the title Molecule to Market with some great industry leaders in the healthcare space. So we will be talking about that topic. And with that, I'll just hand over the mic to Mr. Mahesh to take it from there. Mr. Mahesh, over to you.
Thank you so much. Welcome everybody. And so what we want to try and do for this session is essentially to, just maybe scratch the surface in terms of the use of AI, but analytics in everything from drug discovery all the way to commercialization. So that's what we will try and work on. The way that we will do this is we'll start off with each of the panelists introducing ourselves and our roles. How do we use AI and analytics in our particular roles in the healthcare space? So we'll get started with that. And then at some point, we'll move to having a few questions that some of us will discuss, and then once we get to that point, hopefully we will have some time at the end to take up some of your questions. So what I would like for all of you to do is, if you have any questions, feel free to start typing that into the chat window. I will keep looking at it every once in a while. And if you're able to build those questions into our conversations, for the first hour or so, then we'll already start doing that. Otherwise, we'll try and get back to the questions towards the end. Yeah, so with that, I can get started with my introduction. My name is Mahesh Iyer. By education and profession, I'm a statistician. I got my PhD in stats from one of the universities in the US, worked in pharma with Boehringer Ingelheim, Bristol Myers, and then Novartis for about 20 plus years. Briefly had a foray into entrepreneurship where I set up my own healthcare consulting company. Right now, I'm at PAREXEL and I'm responsible to drive innovation across global development operations and other units within PAREXEL. So where my focus is these days is around really trying to operationalize the promise of AI and analytics. So we speak a lot about what we can do. I think healthcare tends to be a bit of a laggard in terms of being able to take over some of these technologies, predominantly because of a few things, not just regulations. Everybody likes to talk about regulations, but also more importantly, the fact that we deal with patients and people's lives. So we have to be a little bit more careful. The bar is just that little bit higher. So my whole focus these days on how do we operationalize the promise of AI and analytics in our operations. So that's a little bit about me. And what we can do is go in the order that we have in the flyer. So I'll invite Rajneesh to speak about himself. Next.
Thank you, Mahesh. Greetings, everyone. I'm Rajneesh Patel. I head up the digital strategy and analytics for IQVIA. And in terms of my background, quickly, I'm a dentist. So it's a bit of go figure, right? How did I land here? But part of my interest in public health and clinical research is how I've been in the industry for about 15 years now. And most of the role that I perform for IQVIA and in the clinical research space is around creating processes, technologies, and analytics that will help speed up the clinical development process. And I know Mahesh here will talk more on discovery, and I'll try to cover some of the AI/ML applications in development, primarily from a site monitoring perspective, from the perspective of patient data review. How do we do signal detection? How do we do patient safety data quality within the large remit of clinical research processes? And one of the bigger use cases has been the mega vaccine trials in the recent past, right in the last few months. So some of that is what you can touch upon and co-discover some of those aspects of AI/ML with you all. Thanks, Mahesh.
Thank you, Rajneesh. Is Funny back on? Hello? Oh, Funny, there you are. Please go ahead. We can't hear you, Funny. I think you're on mute. No, we still can't hear you.
Is this better? Are you guys able
Oh,
to hear
yeah,
me
yeah, yeah.
now?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Thanks, man.
Okay. Hey, sorry for the bit of trouble. I think there's somewhat of a lag in my connection. I think this is probably the most used word on these in the COVID times, but you're on mute and I can't hear you are probably the most used words on this, in this time and age. But yeah, I'll try and. So my name is Pani Mitra. I've been with Dr. Reddy's for around 6+ years now, around 6.5 years now. And prior to that, at Dr. Reddy's, I lead the digital and process excellence for our India and emerging markets businesses, a bunch of countries, including LATAM, Russia, CIS, and a few countries there. And prior to Dr. Reddy's, I have primarily been in consulting and strategy in the area of analytics and value discovery. So primarily, that's where I come in from. And my exposure to the pharma industry over the last 6-7 years, has been of an eye opener in terms of the value of what the industry brings to the table. And I think COVID has more or less brought it to the fore quite interesting. It also has changed the way the industry operated, significantly as well. Overnight, the reps couldn't go meet the doctors. The manufacturing plants and the R&D scientists were stuck at home, and the quality analysts and the QC labs. So pretty much the entire value chain went through a bit of a disruption, and I think the entire digital and the AI and analytics elements really, sprung to action. The way most of the times what we have been trying to drive have come to life almost overnight. So love to explore some of those thoughts with all of you. This 1 hour or so.
Thank you very much, Funny. Anil, you're up next. Anil, you're also on mute.
You guys can hear me now?
Yep, we can. Thanks, Anil.
Mahesh, happy to be part of this esteemed panel, and thank you very much for getting me into this. Been 20 years in the healthcare industry, J&J, Novartis, and now GSK. I'm the commercial head, responsible for commercial operations in India. My focus has always been the commercial operations, especially final end of getting the product right to the patients. Being a late entrant into the use of AI and analytics, specifically over the last 2 years, we have fundamentally started using these across the areas of improving Salesforce effectiveness and efficiencies, looking at network optimizations, gross to net optimizations, and as well as how do we improve our customer engagement based on the data that we have. It's been a fairly exciting journey. I won't say it's extremely embedded in the culture of the organization. We are still, I would believe, at a proof of concept stage, very early days. But there's a lot of excitement around it as we show that, yes, use of analytics specifically can make a big significant difference to the efficiencies and effectiveness of various processes that we run across the commercial organization.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Anil. Anupam, I think you're up next.
Thanks, Mahesh. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. I lead all analytics, artificial intelligence, and machine learning capabilities for United Health Group. I'm sure, as most of you know, United Health Group is the largest healthcare insurer and healthcare service provider in the United States. So I've been in this role for about 8 years now, with the primary focus of embedding artificial intelligence and machine learning into core operations of an insurance company, which is United Healthcare, as well as our care delivery operations. So, get to look at both sides of the coin, payer as well as provider. Prior to United Health Group, I spent a decade working in the banking and financial services sector, and to the point that Mahesh was making, moved into healthcare, realizing that there was so much to do from an adoption standpoint when it came to analytics in healthcare, and that's when I decided to move into United Health Group. This year has been obviously extremely exciting and extremely busy because of COVID and everything that COVID challenged us to do from a healthcare standpoint. Primarily, the emphasis during the initial period was to be able to predict where the next wave of COVID is going to be hitting in mainland United States, to help the federal government prepare itself, to be able to get ready to move quickly in those areas. But now that things are settling down, the emphasis has more been on being able to track, how many patients, how much cost, where do we go next, and so on and so forth. But right now, the emphasis has also moved on digital, telemedicine, digital healthcare. How do we ensure that our patients don't have to step out of their home to be able to get healthcare unless it's really necessary? And I think we are playing a significant part in being able to enable that for United Health Group as a company. So I'm really looking forward to a great conversation today. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Anupam. And then we move to Rajneesh Pathak.
Thanks, Mahesh, and thanks for having me here. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rajneesh Pathak. I lead AI and analytics offering and product development for Genpact. And in my role, I typically embed AI and analytics across the value chain for all products and solutions for different verticals. And in this role, since it's a broad-based role for different kind of offering and solutions which we take to the market, I get an opportunity to work with payer, provider, health services company, medical devices companies, and almost all the player in healthcare ecosystem. And I help bring in data and analytics-driven transformation and solutions for the challenges which our clients are facing. And it's as everyone has talked, it's a fairly interesting time. The whole healthcare ecosystem is under stress, as well as it's adapting to the newer models. New innovations are coming in. Telehealth, which was probably at the back burner, have started coming to the main foray. Similarly, lots of decisions which were taking a really slow time to come to a conclusion. Lots of things has been rapidly adopted. All the digital, all data, all conversation, the decision cycles have shortened. So, and it's a challenging yet a very interesting time for AI and analytics, and what kind of value it can drive. Excited to be here, and I would love to share whatever I'm seeing across the different clients.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Rajneesh. This is spectacular. So guys, so this is the panel that we have. As you can see, we have a couple of folks, me and Rajneesh, who have most of our experience in the drug discovery development space. We have Funny, who really has a whole breadth of experience across process excellence. We have Anil with a lot of experience on the commercial end of things. Then of course we have Anshuman and Rajneesh Pathak, who basically have a lot of experience on the payer provider end of things. So that's kind of where we're going to go. Most of our questions that we'll have to the panel will be focused around their areas of expertise, and the idea would be to try and see if we can develop what we are saying through examples, what's really happening on the ground here, and then what are some areas where we still feel that the adoption and operationalizing of this work is still lagging behind the theory of what is possible, right? So that's what we're going to start with. So initially, our first thing we're going to start with is around drug discovery to marketing, right? So proper pharma, right? And those, basically, I will invite myself, Rajneesh, and Funny and Anil to speak around that. But to start with, the idea is, where is AI and analytics really making a big impact? What are some examples of what's happening out there? So just to try and mimic the drug development life cycle, what I can do is I can get started with me speaking a little bit on the discovery end of things, right? So for all of the people who are attending this session today and really don't know let's say, how does drug development, discovery development, pharma industry, how does it work? Here is a quick 2-minute thing, right? So you start with a disease, right? And you want us to figure out, how do you tackle the particular disease, right? And so to get to the disease, you identify a particular marker, right? So let's take something like diabetes, yeah? And you say, diabetes is my disease. I want to figure out how do I take care of what causes diabetes. So we know it's either blood glucose or another marker called HbA1c. So that's a marker. And then we want to say, okay, if that goes high, means that, I'm not feeling well, right? So then you start to figure out drugs that will go and hit that particular marker, right? Bring it down. And once you're able to bring that down, you would assume that your disease is also going to be under control, right? And so the way you do it is you first identify the disease, you identify the target, then you identify a potential drug which will go hit that particular target and do what you want it to do. And then you say, okay, now I'm going to start developing this by taking it first to preclinical and then to animals and then to humans across different phases. We call it phase 1, 2, 3. Each of them having different numbers of patients, different endpoints to see if the drug works, if it is safe, if it is efficacious, if it actually does what it's supposed to do. And then you get it to an approval, which is where the discovery and development piece stop, right? After that, we get into the marketing piece, which is how do I now commercialize this? How do I figure out where is the best place for me to go and sell this drug? How do I get, how do I price it appropriately that the maximum of people can get benefit, right? And that's the second component. And then after that, we get to the third component, which is not, so developed in India, I guess, but it's catching on, which is who's going to pay for this? Are people going to pay for it themselves? Are organizations, insurance companies going to pay? How do we figure out, what are the right models for us to get, the right levels of premium for payments and so on and so forth? How do we track all of that stuff, right? So this, in a nutshell, is to say, how do we start from a disease all the way to, how does it reach a particular patient, right? So as you can see, all of these are very distinct buckets. So if you take discovery, for example, discovery is where you're trying to identify a disease, you're trying to identify the target, and you're trying to identify a molecule that will hit the target, right? And you can see that it's so in the past, I always say that they had the easy stuff because they had all the low-hanging fruit. Okay, your head was hurting, you popped an aspirin, you were good. Yeah, so it was relatively simpler. Now what we are saying is, and those were what were called chemical entities, right? Now we are moving to this whole thing around biological entities. We are moving into gene therapy, right? And imagine the amount of data that one needs to analyze here. Yeah. So for all of you, again, who are not very well versed in this area, let's say that your DNA, has, a series of alphabets, right? And the alphabets are made up of A, C, T, and G. Yeah. How long is it? It's 3 million base pairs. Yeah. You all have seen the typical thing of the DNA where you have 2 strands going right next to each other. Each one is called one of the pairs, right? So you have two, so you have 2 of them, hence you have a pair. And you have 3 million of these letters, A, C, T, and G. Yeah. And now what you need to do is you say that a combination of these letters, let's say 25 of them or 174 of them, okay, that combination of letters is called a gene. Okay, how many genes do we know of? We know of about anywhere between 20 to 35,000 genes, right? Each of these genes now makes a bunch of proteins. Yeah, how many proteins do we know? Thousands and thousands of proteins, right? And most of these proteins are responsible for things happening in our body. Are we going to create more cells? Are we going to create less cells? Are we going to increase our HbA1c? Are we going to be able to metabolize sugar? Are we going to be able to, clog our arteries so we get a heart attack, right? Each of these genes and proteins is responsible for, or a combination of these proteins is responsible for these activities. So for us to be able to go through and figure out which combination of proteins is actually going to cause the disease, as you can see, is a huge analytical problem. Yeah, the combinatorials of that is not something that is easy for us to do. And so of late, what people have started to do is to say, how can I get more information around this? So there are research labs spread across the world. How do I go and pick up information on what is happening? These genes are not all independent, right? Some of them, when one gene goes up, the other gene also goes up, or a third gene goes down. So they are either upregulated or downregulated. How do I know the connection between these? And there are people writing research papers on this. And one of the areas where people have been using a lot of NLP techniques is to be able to pull these, information from all these journal articles. Yeah, imagine that there are thousands of articles being published every month, right? And then each of these articles are saying that these genes are correlated with these other genes. Imagine bringing them all in, building models so that you can say, I have a drug which impacts this gene, right? But this gene is upregulated with this other gene or downregulated with this other gene. So therefore, instead of just looking at this drug for, let's say, diabetes, I can also look for this drug for, let's say, arthritis. Yeah. And how do I figure out what are the other disease areas that the same drug can actually be useful? That's another area where a lot of work using NLP, using analytics to build these models is actually happening. Right? So the whole space of collating this information, assimilating this information, and then being able to run these models is a really, really fertile area. And there's a lot of companies. Broad Institute does this with images of cells. Janssen does it with models of proteins. All the big pharma companies are essentially focused in this space of saying how can we use AI and analytics to build this, right? So that's one quick area for us to think about where we could use AI and analytics in the drug discovery space. I want to move to Rajneesh Patel, who will talk to us a little bit around where do we use this now that, let's say that we have assumed that we have a drug, that we have figured out this drug for this disease. Now, if I want to develop it, what are the areas where AI and analytics are used? Rajneesh, over to you.
Sure, Mahesh. And thanks for that intro. Sets us up well, I think, to talk about drug discovery. So picking up from where Mahesh left, in terms of the molecular science, identifying a promising candidate molecule that can help become a marketable medicine, right? So even if you take the very first stage after we've discovered a molecule, we have seen, and I had the privilege of working on a few projects of late in IQVIA, some of the near-term benefits, right? For example, when you have the molecule, one of the first things you want to do is disease detection, right? In populations of data, what we call in this industry as real-world data, meaning all the data that's lined out there in medical systems, hospital systems, clinicians, all of that data could be utilized to do disease detection in a way that we can identify target patient populations where this molecule should reach and can reach. Which means in the clinical research space, when we first set out to conduct a clinical trial study, and to your point, Mahesh, I can't help but say most of the people are now aware of clinical trials because of the COVID-19 impact, and everyone is interested in knowing what do you mean when you say research, right? So it has brought up the whole population knowledge to a good extent. So picking up from that, right, you've heard of phase 1 trials, phase 2 trials, how do you do safety, etc. So the very first component of disease detection is one of the very prominent use cases for the data scientists who are probably listening in, for the healthcare professionals probably listening in to our panel here, interested in working in the space. I think that element of disease detection, applying analytics, from analytics moving to predictive analytics, right? Looking at predicting which patients could potentially have certain diseases. And that's where I think Mahesh was going with certain genomics related data analysis. Now, genomics is not just one science, right? All the omics, right? Proteomics, metabolomics, any other omics you heard of are great use cases for leveraging data to do disease detection. From disease detection, if you move to in clinical research, there is a lot of emphasis and a lot of literally billions of dollars, right? When we talk about 12 years, $2.6 billion spent on getting one molecule to the market, a lot of that money goes into managing the research processes, right? Between 3 to 5 to 10 years, how we do hospital selection, what investigators we work with, which specialists in what areas of the world, right? Like Funny was talking about global presence of clinical trials. That decision making is also another great use case for AI ML, where you're looking at, again, a lot of real world data, a lot of data from past clinical research trials, and identifying where are the right sites, where are the right target populations of patients, and how do we reach those to conduct the research. That's another big area. And the third one, I'll probably pause there and hand it over to our next speaker, is everything we do in what is called as clinical monitoring, right? Anywhere between 50 to 60% of these $2.6 billion I was talking about for a molecule to come to the market is spent on monitoring a trial, right? Monitoring sites, monitoring patient safety, monitoring data quality. As you can imagine, a lot of that is driven by data, right? And if we can apply, and we have applied several use cases I can share as we talk here, we are able to do automated signal detection on patient safety, on data quality, managing regulatory site compliance through these analytics. All of that is becoming a true beneficial impact that AI/ML can bring, not just in terms of productivity and cost savings, but in terms of speed, because that's of essence, right? And we all know in the last 12 months how speed was the most important factor, even to get to the vaccines, right? We were not talking about anything else. We were not talking about cost. We were not talking about the complexity. We were talking about when can we have it. I think that speed is the other big impact area that AI/ML has caused in terms of research. So with that, Mahesh, maybe turn it back to
Perfect, Rajni. Oh, thank you so much for that. Funny, I want to move to you and see some examples from your end in terms of how we use AI analytics in the development, but also moving on to commercial space.
Can you hear me okay, Mahesh? Or?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
So I think I would not have the courage to speak after you and Rajneesh on the clinical and the details of drug development, but I can share for the folks who are pure AI ML kind of practitioners and leaders. And when I first came into Dr. Reddy's and I looked at our R&D space and say, what can I do? What do I bring to the table to make this happen? One of the most interesting set of use cases I figured was in the formulation space. Once the target molecule is identified, Mahesh, you would know this. Is the entire process of developing the formulation. Putting the API and the excipient together to actually make it manufacturable. And how can some of the advances in AI/ML help there? I can share a couple of use cases that I found pretty exciting to work on and had the teams deliver on it. Was one in the R&D space where the entire formulation and the characterization of the product itself is done. So there's this one example where one of these liposomal products, there is a protein image, and there were and the scientists here, obviously very smart people, were trying to characterize it by looking at the images of these in our advanced characterization labs, right? And there was one use case where a typical computer vision crowd detection algorithms, a bunch of them put together, actually created a lot of value when we could save time and improve the effectiveness of how accurately the scientists could actually characterize that particular product. So for me, as I said, I can, as a layman, when it comes to the pharma world, it was a bunch of circles and rectangles to be identified, and I don't know why the scientists should take so long to figure this out. And that's how the teams actually brought in a good combination of computer vision as well as some of the image detection algorithms. And that is an exciting space for us, because as a generics company and as a company that is more focused on formulating and developing the products as quickly as we can, this is a competitive advantage to us. If I can characterize the product, formulate the product faster, and take it to the market faster, that actually creates value both for the business as well as to the patients. So there are some exciting use cases that we see now in our R&D labs, primarily around product development, drug excipient compatibility, and more interestingly, in the place of for example, regulatory filing. I think you briefly touched upon it, Mahesh, on the
on the NLP techniques and text mining that is being used for scientific documentation and process design. But there are also very interesting use cases we are seeing internally, we are developing internally around how do I file the products with our regulatory teams faster and catering to the requirements of various markets that we operate in. So primarily these two are great examples that I can think of, a very standard set of techniques but customized to the use case to deliver business value. So that's on the R&D space. And if you actually take it forward into the manufacturing, again, very, very interesting set of use cases we're finding. I can give you an example of our of the work that we are doing in our API manufacturing, for example. A set of process parameters that essentially yield a golden patch. We have algorithms now running across the historical set of batches, trying to identify what is the golden batch, what does the golden batch look like, and what are the critical process parameters that we should be operating it in. Very, very effective when it comes to even creating business value, because we are seeing yield improvements of 2 to 5% on certain products, huge cost saving, and hence the business teams also feel excited about some of these things. So these are that's on the manufacturing side. And if I extend it into formulation plans and multiple use cases of how do I help the operators make decisions better on how they run the process, right? So there are a bunch of use cases there. And the commercial space, I will let Anil obviously add a lot more. But to me, why it is more exciting as a space is the number of reps, at least in the Indian pharma and some of the branded markets and the emerging markets that we operate in. The number of reps on the field, a simple example is there are like 7,000 reps meeting 10 doctors a day, and I have 70,000 interactions, and all these interactions are happening on an iPad. Just imagine, and just the numbers just multiply, right? And 70,000 interactions multiplied by 5, multiplied by 12, and just the sheer amount of data that it generates has not been really explored or incited ever before. And compared to an FMCG industry, we as an industry have obviously lagged behind, but the data exists. And in R&D, in manufacturing, the joke is that we make more paper than pills, in the pharma industry. It's just the sheer regulation and hence the data that we make as well, right? So I think it's a pretty exciting space, and the number of use cases that are possible are endless. But I would probably hand it over back to you, Mahesh or Anil, to take it into the commercial space. Happy to add more as we talk.
Perfect. Thanks, Funny, so much for that view on the manufacturing space. That's brilliant. Anil, moving to you for the commercial angle. On mute, Anil.
I guess I'm not technologically savvy. But coming back, Funny, thanks for that segue. I think guys who spoke before me have figured out what drug to make. They figured out how to get some evidence around it. And Funny's figured out how to manufacture it. Now it comes about how do you convince the healthcare practitioner that your drug works, and second, get the patient to consume it in the right manner at the right time. And I emphasize on right manner and right time because it's very critical. For a drug to work, one of the most critical things is compliance. Human beings as a construct are not very happy being regulated and told to do things at right points in time. Compliance is one of the biggest challenges that the pharmaceutical industry faces. Forget India, it's a global issue. Many of you would know, let's take a example that's close to my heart of anti-infectives. You start popping a pill, you feel better, you say, then why the hell do I need the pill after that? Without really understanding, you actually need it for 5 days and 3 times a day to make sure that the product has really worked and the disease doesn't recur. Chronic, it becomes even more an issue. Globally, a lot of companies, including ours, are looking at fundamentally how do you improve compliance to make sure that the drug works. And there are multiple ways of doing this. Of course, The latest fashion is to look at wearables and the data drawn out of wearables to see how the patient is behaving. Wearables need not necessarily be a smartwatch. It could be an embedded glucometer. It could be multiple things that are there. And imagine if you're flowing this data in across 1 million users, that's a significant amount of data. And how do you start looking at it? And how do you combine this? And this is work that's going on, and I know I won't name the company, being closely associated with it, and not GSK. Work that what's going on in line with this, the chatter that's on in social media around this. And how do you marry these two together and see what's your intervention required to improve compliance? Not only compliance, it also serves as early warning signals around what safety considerations can appear for your drug. Lack of compliance can have its own challenges around safety consideration. Overuse can have safety considerations. You can start picking up this chatter, and it gives you early warning signals around safety, which is a critical area, especially post commercialization for drug use. As you start looking at post marketing, what starts happening with the drug. My area of expertise is obviously in the generic space. Sales and marketing, especially in emerging markets, large sales organization. Funny spoke about 7,000 guys doing 10 calls a day. Let me amplify to my use case. We do close to 5 million touch points with 350,000 HCPs in a month. So over the last 3 years, can you imagine the amount of data that we have stored somewhere inside the system, telling us what is going on, how are the customers behaving, and if we can start relating it to market share data, there is significant work that both analytics and AI can do. So that's one area we have been specifically working on, and that leads us, how do you do segmentation by digital persona to what kind of channels will a customer react? Some guys prefer face-to-face, don't want any digital channel out there, and there are guys most of the guys sit somewhere in between. And how do you figure out how to effectively deploy these resources so that they're most efficiently used? That's around efficiency, customer engagement. But there's another interesting area that we have been exploring, which is Salesforce training. Can you imagine if you have to train, say, 10,000 people across 15 markets in a span of 3 days, and make sure they are extremely effective when they step out and meet a doctor, and ensure that the critical messages that you want the Salesforce to deliver is delivered at the right time in the appropriate manner. In old days, we would have deployed maybe 100 sales trainers, and they would have physically trained the guys, check their delivery, etc. But what we are trying to do today is, we have NLP-based coaching? So the salesman actually makes a presentation to an iPad, and the guy is looking, and there is a at the back end looking what messages are being delivered, how is the message being delivered, what's the expression on the guy's face, and then a coaching feedback comes, which goes to his supervisor. We've seen some amazing results about it, and I'll talk a little bit about this later when I talk about what we have actually done. Very exciting area. One of the things we don't see, especially, is we are finding it very difficult to attract the right talent into the space, because they wonder what we will be doing if we come and join, say, for example, a GSK in India. Back to you, Mahesh.
Thank you so much, Anil. Good food for thought. Perfect. So we have heard from all the folks on the pharma end of things, and I think now we would like to hear from the payer and provider end of things. So similar question, starting first with Anupam. Anupam, where do you see AI and analytics being used? What are some examples in your line of work where we use a lot of AI and analytics?
Sure, Mahesh. So for everyone's benefit, when we say payer and provider, these are very specific industry terms. So for anyone who's not familiar with what do we mean, the insurance company is called the payer, so the insurance company that's going to pay for the treatment or whatever intervention that the insured person has gone through is called the payer, and the doctors or the physicians and the hospital entities are called providers because they're the ones who are providing the healthcare. So that's the genesis of the term. So payers are insurance companies like like you can think of Aetna or United Healthcare or Cigna in that respect, all payer companies, and providers are doctors and hospitals. And the insured entity, the end customer is actually called the member. So member, payer, and provider are the key entities when we think about healthcare insurance. Now, the adoption of machine learning and artificial intelligence over the past about half a decade in the insurance industry has been tremendous. There's not even a single aspect that's remained untouched. But to highlight a few examples that everybody would be able to relate to today. The first is when you interact with an insurance company, what do you really care about? Well, the first thing you care about is when you need an insurance company to pay a claim, then your claim doesn't get denied. Right now, think about the experience of an insured entity. We've all had experiences like these. When somebody has gone through treatment, we've gone through treatment, or a family member has gone through treatment, and we send through a claim for that treatment, and the company says, you know what, we're going to deny your claim. You will not believe how rampant that is, and you will also not believe in how many cases claims are actually denied incorrectly just because of how many federal regulations and the many different ways and means, or there are many different aspects that have to be considered in claim decisioning, which results in a fairly large number of claims getting denied. Well, the percentage might not be very high, but if you look at absolute number of claims that get incorrectly denied is fairly high. So the first area in which we embedded machine learning was to ensure that claims were not being incorrectly denied, or how do we minimize the incidence of claims being incorrectly denied. To be able to do that, the first thing that has to happen is you look at all data elements that possibly that are considered to make a decision on a claim, and you bring that all together and you augment the decision of the human that's actually making the call. So instead of the human completely depending on their own standard operating procedure, can the machine put through an augmented decision and say, you know what, all 99.9% of such claims in the previous 5 years have been approved. So, if you are going to deny this claim, there might be merit in looking more closely, because in 99.9%, we have always approved these claims in the past. So better take a closer look. Right. So that has significantly improved the accuracy rate by which, claim decisions happen. And that makes a lot of sense. Another key aspect of improving consumer experience is when somebody calls us, or, when one of our members calls us or reaches out to us, then how do we interact with them? How informed are our contact center agents, to be able to solve their query? When we receive a call from a member, do we talk to them like we know them, or do we talk to them like we're talking to them for the first time? And I think all of us who've ever called into a contact center, it could be for anything. It could be for your mobile phone. It could be for anything. I'm sure you know how frustrating it is when the contact center agent talks to you as if they have no idea about you, or, they don't know anything about you, which product you have. So, and that's a problem because, just somebody was talking about the clinical data that we manage and just the amount of data that has to be handled for every member that we deal. So another area in which artificial intelligence and machine learning has really helped is being able to predict what incoming call is coming in for. So now when a member is calling us, we are able to show our contact center agents that here is the likely reason that this person is calling you for. In all likelihood, the reason he's calling you for is that his claim is delayed, and immediately all information related to the claim is put on the agent's screen so that he doesn't have to wait and get that information and make the the person who's calling in wait. He is immediately able to solve the query, and that has improved the first call resolution rate. That's what it's called, the FCR rate. That has significantly improved the first call resolution rate for people who call into our contact centers. And the conversation of moving calls into digital is a completely different conversation. I'll not go there. But from being able to improve consumer experience, those are two areas where artificial intelligence and machine learning have been able to help. A second broad area from an insurance company standpoint is how do we reduce the cost of care? As you know, cost of care in the United States is really high and it's really expensive. So one area where artificial intelligence has really helped, and everybody who's worked in the banking domain would be able to, relate to this, is predicting fraud based on abuse. In a lot of cases, the claims that are made could be fraudulent in nature. And if we are not able to detect that fraud before it gets paid, then it's not good for anyone because it increases the overall cost of healthcare. More and more fraud dollars that we as insurance companies pay increase the cost of healthcare. So machine learning models, outlier detection models are regularly used to get better and better detection of fraud at a claim level so that we are able to prevent fraud dollars from going out of the system. And the second area for reducing costs is, similar to what Rajneesh was talking about earlier, disease prevention. So we've moved from disease detection using, say, convolutional neural networks, on clinical images, to being able to predict which person is likely to have which disease, say, 6 months or 8 months from now, and trying to intervene to be able to prevent that disease from happening in the first place. Now, that not only helps our members live more healthier lifestyles, but obviously then also reduces the cost of care that we incur as an organization. So it's a win-win for everyone. The only difference from, the thing that Rajneesh was talking about was disease prediction using genomics data. Uh, while we are building capabilities on that side, we are using disease prediction primarily using clinical information. So, if we have clinical information, we have wearable information, to the point that Anil was making earlier. And if you combine clinical data, if you have wearable data, to a very large extent, you can predict lifestyle diseases. So, if a person is obese in nature, has had hypertension history in his claims in the past, and from his wearables that he's not getting a lot of exercise, you can get to a point where you say this person has an X% probability of having, cardiac disease over the next 6 to 8 months. So, what kind of interventions can we get in today so that that kind of disease can be prevented? And I think those are some of the really game-changing interventions that artificial intelligence and machine learning is helping the insurance companies with. Mahesh, so back to you.
Super. Thanks so much, Anupam. Rajneesh, any thoughts from you around examples of AI and analytics in the work that you do?
Absolutely. And Mahesh, as I mentioned, I work across different entities into the health care ecosystem. And as Anupam has already talked about payer, let me talk a little bit about provider side of the equation and the other entities into the ecosystem, like medical devices companies and other places. If I think about provider space, there are two broad themes which emerges where AI gets used. One is on the clinical side of it, another is on the administrative side of it. Though lots of hype is around clinical side of it, where clinical decision support system, radiology, in radiology, computer vision, reading the images, detecting cancer, detecting different kind of diseases, all those things are a lot more presented in the media. But the significant amount of money and significant amount of saving and the efficiencies are being generated today on the administrative side of the equation. Appointment management, staffing, capacity management, on the back office side, how you manage the cash flows, documentation, clinical notes, forecasting cash, forecasting bad debt, denials, all those kind of routine and redundant tasks, which really takes up the time from the clinicians, is something where the AI is making a really, really significant impact. If I think about the back office on their side, revenue cycle management overall is a big area where AI is being implemented and giving a significant amount of benefits for them. Also, what COVID has done essentially is it's created a significant amount of unpredictability into the ecosystem. And lots of firms right now, as the ecosystem started becoming unpredictable, all the data which was available historically is not good enough to predict what's going to happen in the future. So we see a significant amount of search in terms of bringing in some sense of predictability into the ecosystem. there are epidemiological models, but can that, along with some of the temporal variables and the human interventions, can be deployed to really think about capacity and availability? Can I create a dashboard which is intelligent enough to look at the real-time operations and work as a command center, have a triggers, which is a lot more cognitive triggers, which can really start giving the inputs and the real time to make certain decisions. Very simple solutions. It's not very complex AI used in many cases, but something which is really working. That has started coming into the and generating significant amount of benefit for the clients which I'm looking at. Also, what I see that clinical decision support system, there are some of the elements which were there has started becoming a mainstream now, and lots of clients have started using it, and that's also generating value. So if I think about 4 or 5 broad areas where AI is making an impact, one would be the back office, making all the things which are not visible to anyone, cash forecasting, working capital management, managing the supply chain efficiency, that kind of stuff on the back office. Administrative tasks where nurses and clinicians are wasting to a large extent of time and which they potentially could spend with patients is another area where AI is making a significant difference. NLP getting used into making the notes, deciding extracting various information, providing information to the clinicians. All those things are happening, and the embedding small AI use cases like in radiology and other things are something which is making a significant impact in there. If I think about the medical services companies, like any CPG or other company, they are again dealing with the uncertainty on the supply chain, uncertainty into predicting how many PPE kits would be required, how many masks would be required, and all those kind of things where both supply and demand side has become really unpredictable. So AI is really helping them into building some of the more refined models which can help them into meeting their requirement. So these are the broad areas which I see where our clients are engaging AI to make better decisions today.
Super, thanks, Rajneesh. Brilliant. So folks, you've heard from each and every one of the speakers. You've heard about use of AI, examples of AI and analytics across discovery, through development, through manufacturing, through commercialization. Heard both from the payer end as well as from the provider end. So I'm going to go around with a couple more questions which have much shorter answers that I will solicit much shorter answers from the panelists. But in the meantime, if any of you have any questions that you would like me to bring up, feel free to use the chat window, and I'll try and see if we can get that in. So what I'm going to do is in the interest of time, I'm going to move things around a little bit, right? And what I heard, both from Anupam and Rajneesh Pathak, for all the folks who are working on the pharma side, what I really heard from the payer and provider side is they seem to have a lot more examples. It looks like, they have really sorted out where AI and analytics is really used, right? So for us, on the pharma side, what is your sense? Is your sense that we are still sort of in the proof of concept stage with some applications, or are we, much farther advanced? Is it become routine for us? Have we really sorted out our AI analytics initiatives, on the pharma side, right? And I want to start with Rajneesh Patil. If you can give me your views on that.
Sure, Mahesh. So I think given all the interest and the investment that's going in, I do think there is still, and what Anil was saying, we're probably still only scratching the surface of the capability. AI/ML has been around since, data scientists will claim World War II ended because of data science, right? If you look at Imitation Game as a movie. So it's been around, the hype has been around, but the acceleration has come from some of the COVID-19 impact. There has been a lot of, in our own personal experience, we've seen a lot of implementation, which, for 4 years, where we were banging our heads to say this solution exists, do you want to try it? There is now knocking on the door to say, can we have some of those analytics we've been talking about? But having said that, to the question of, are we in a nascent stage? I don't think we're in a nascent stage. There is a broad recognition of the application now. it's not easy to fit AI ML into operating models, right? Let's face that. So there is a need for change management. There is a need for bringing professionals together for managing the behavioral changes that humans have for artificial intelligence. I think no intelligence is really artificial. It's all human intelligence at the end of the day. It's a matter of how do you marry it well to the existing processes.
Yes, thank you, Rajneesh. That was brilliant. Funny, what do you think?
So I've seen, Mahesh, that whenever there is proximity to consumers and whenever there is proximity to cash, the AI/ML use cases just scale faster. So I'm not surprised that the providers and payers are doing it faster. I think, and that's true for all industries. And one of the reasons why pharma, probably lagged behind was there was really no necessity or no burning platform, as we call, right? Nothing was threatening them in any way. So I think but that has changed significantly with COVID, and even pre-COVID, there have been significant amount of significant amount of realization in the industry that this is the way to go. We've been sitting on this data for a long time, so I know of the work that we have been doing internally. Novartis talks about it. A bunch of people actually started talking about bringing the data together. Let's do more with this. So I think we are, to Rajneesh's point, I completely agree that we are beyond the POC stages. But I think in the organizational context, the speed is also different at different levels, and I truly believe in it, because in the whenever there is a customer or a consumer or an operator or a medical rep, the speed with which these AI use cases are scaling is actually much higher. So when I take a AI use case of what are the most optimal settings for setting up this compression machine in the manufacturing plant, the operators, if they like what they see, it just scales. That model that predicts what is the best optimal setting, it just scaled so quickly. We were pleasantly surprised, right? We have seen it with a couple of use cases with our medical reps. So the proximity to the consumer, because of data as well as because of the value that is realized, we see a huge scale up. And the second part on cash, wherever you see that there is an efficiency, wherever you see that there is a growth opportunity because of doing it. And I was giving you this example of yield analytics. The examples that we have in, for example, dossier filing with regulatory, huge movement or explosion in terms of growth, primarily because it actually creates value for the business. So I personally think we are moving faster than what we were. Of course, there is significant ground to cover, but I'm more excited and hopeful for the industry. And I see too, I think Anil or someone is making a point. We now feel it is easier to attract talent because there is a significant excitement about, oh, these guys seem to be doing good work. They seem to have good data, exciting use cases coming up. And in other industries, they have kind of figured out the use cases are plateaued. It's the same marketing mix model, and we have kind of hit the ceiling on some of them, and we know it works or it doesn't, right? I think that way I see more excitement and more productionizing happening, and I think in a sad way, but truly it's COVID also that helped.
All right. Thanks, Funny. Thank you so much. Anil, what are your thoughts from?
Thanks. Actually, I will divide the commercial world into two parts: the developed market and the emerging markets, because both are at different places in the journey of adoption. In developed markets, definitely on the commercial side, some of the use cases that I spoke about, there are evangelists out there saying, yes, we should use this. And they're, I think, beyond the proof of concept stage. Where I would respectfully disagree with Funny, in emerging markets, I think we're still in very, very early days. For two reasons. One is historically, we are a generic space. I'll give you a very example and related to what Funny is talking about, cash. This is an industry that carries huge amount of inventory. Nobody knows why, but they do just carry huge amount of inventory, whether it's finished goods or whatever, raw materials or whatever. And then suddenly comes along a guy and says you can actually work at half that inventory and make sure that you have no loss of sales. It takes advice some time, and I'm really saying some time in quotes, to convince people that it can be done. There are naysayers like, our business is not predictable. Let's say, for example, we are in acute care. You don't know when cough syrup will go through the roof and so on and so forth. But it is tough, but it is possible. And somebody needs to be extremely resilient behind this. But there's recognition that has started coming in. Let me take a hot there. I see Funny smiling. He sees a lot of this, I guess.
No, I was just, if I were to add, Anil, I just wanted to quickly add, because again, the way I see it is when somebody starts eating your lunch, people will wake up. When the e-pharmacies came in and offered 20% discount and said, how are you doing it? And they said it is because of inventory and efficiencies in supply chain. There is already cash and hence realization. So I was just, I think it connects.
Good, perfect. No, great stuff. So, so we've been hearing a lot around, how wonderful AI and ML is, how it is the next best thing after sliced bread, I had this cartoon once where somebody said, can you give me some AI ML with that, So it's basically, everybody wants AI ML now, right? The quest on the flip side, though, we've been seeing a lot of other things going on, right? So for example, I read yesterday that IBM is planning to spin off Watson, right? And it was the most decorated AI/ML, initiative at one point of time. And essentially, even the chance that you could be wrong for such a small percent of the time because of the biasedness of the data that's input is enough, for somebody to basically put their arm's length away and say, can't trust a system if it even impacts a single patient's life in terms of the wrong let's say prediction, right? So things like that. So so the bar from a patient life is set very, very high. Similarly, when you look at the payer provider end of things, we've had some experiences in the past where if you go to a hospital and say, what, I can take your hospital information system, I can take your medical information system, I can take your supply, I'll pull it all together, so that, when somebody writes a prescription, you will know exactly that, this is your stock, this is your inventory. So you go and order only at that point of time. And the minute you go and give them these solutions, somebody comes and says, hey, how am I going to make my money then, right? Because, one of the reasons that people make money is by these systems being completely disparate in some sense, right? So we've seen some of these. So according to you guys, what are some of the major challenges for us in adoption of AI ML, and not just these ones, but anything else that you can think of, whether it's talent, whether it's attitude, whether it's it's the quality of the data. Like, what are your thoughts? And I want to start with Rajneesh first in terms of what you think are some of our biggest hurdles in being able to adopt AI ML to the extent that we want to.
Right. So there are a number of areas where AI ML is really challenged. What we have hyped in the media and other places that AI is a silver bullet which can solve everything without understanding where the constraints lie. First part of the equation is that AI will work as good as the data which comes in there. In the healthcare ecosystem, access to the high quality data is still a big challenge. And that's where you will see on in a number of places, AI use cases are suffering. If you talked about Watson, by design, it is a fabulous system which can predict something, but it doesn't have got enough data which comes from the health system to be efficient. So that's the one challenge which AI has got. Second is what you pointed out, the potential bias in data. Most of the AI algorithms which are being created today are based on certain population, and that may or may not replicate across the population within a country or across the country. And if you are creating that as a benchmark for any clinical decision, that's a big challenge. So addressing bias in data is difficult because electronic health data currently available is not representative of general population. That's a fundamental thing which you will see. And it will take time. Unless until that gets done, that's not going to happen. Third aspect of it is what we call as a scale issue. AI tools today, and lots of things which you will see in media also, that that AI use cases has been created. A system can go and detect whether someone has a cancerous nodule or not, and or AI can see instead of complete blood count doing through you can do a computer vision based complete blood count. But all these things have been created in a very restricted and a very controlled environment. For a scale, it needs to marry with the systems which is there in the workflow. And that's another very difficult part where the systems don't talk to each other, not yet. And that's a one big hindrance for AI to scale in the ecosystem. And one of the biggest is what you'll call is the patient privacy legislation around it that doesn't allow it to access everything what it can access. And related to that is the liability of the AI tools. Legally, there is not sufficient amount of framework available. For instance, you talked about Watson, or I was talking about AI system which goes and detects there is a cancer or not. What happens if it goes wrong? Who will take the liability? The legislation around it is still not very clearly articulated. And so there are significant challenges. First is the algorithms are not perfect, data is not perfect, and system is not really ready to adopt everything in there. And what I believe is the biggest and the best way of looking at this is the AI augmenting the ecosystem, not replacing anyone. Until the time we have a view that it can augment, it can provide a decision support, not decide. It can provide information for clinician to make a decision. Till the time we are keeping it in that realm, AI can still work. But otherwise, we still have a long way to go before it becomes a reality and where it can scale and what you see in movies becomes reality.
Right. Thanks. Yeah, Minority Report, right? Thanks, Rajneesh. Anil, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think Rajneesh covered some great points, so I won't repeat them. But I think the importance of see, AI at its core will always be, it's a predictive way of doing things, right? And the healthcare industry is so tightly regulated. The pressure of regulation is so high that internally for the businesses to be able to absorb the risk of a false positive or a false negative is really, it's difficult to convince the business that no model will be able to give you 100% accurate prediction. At that point, it's not a model, it's a rule. You know, it's a rule that's working with 100% accuracy. You might as well build it into the system. You know, if you have a rule that's working with 100% accuracy, what you have is a system fix. You don't really have a model, right? I think that's key. And there isn't enough regulation around it. There isn't enough ways to deal with that. But I think that's where we face a lot of resistance. That, you know, when you go and talk to the business who really don't understand machine learning or artificial intelligence, who've heard a lot of buzz around it, and you go and tell them, you know what, I can get this right 80% of the times, which by the way is great. You know, from a modeling standpoint, it's great. So the immediate question that you hear is, well, you mean you're going to get it wrong 20% of the time? Do you know what that means? From a patient perspective. So I think that's a very important point.
Thanks. No, Anupam. And I think the movie I saw, Minority Reports, exactly is that. They get it wrong, you know, because there's one person that has a minority report once in a while, which basically kills Tom Cruise. But no, just kidding.
Exactly.
Anil, what about you? What do you think? I know you had briefly alluded a little bit to talent, you know, when you spoke earlier. So I just wanted to come back to that point and say, what do you feel from a talent perspective, or any other, challenge that you see from using AI analytics in the healthcare space, especially in pharma?
So the two challenges I see. One is, of course, talent. It's very difficult to attract the right talent, especially at the middle management level. People who really understand what needs to be done. People like me are able to build and say what we need, but want to get people who can do it is extremely difficult. Second is that is one, but that is something I believe has started changing, because if we don't have talent internally, you can always go out and look at it externally, and that's something we have been doing. But the bigger issue we see is around culture. And the the sheer resistance to change, what Rajneesh just spoke about. I mean, what if you're wrong 20% of the time? For example, we were trying to build a predictive model. It is no doubt extremely difficult. The business we are in is around anti-infectives, so requires extreme predicting of when will the flu happen and so on and so forth. It's very difficult. We made an attempt at it. One, of course, is the quality of the data that itself is available. The epidemiology. So we were actually using multiple things. We are looking at, longitudinal data on what has happened in the past. We were looking at WHO data. We were looking at social chatter around what kind of diseases, and trying to build a model. We spent a loose bit of change, but the outcome was zero, because we realized that we're playing with too many variables over here, and our accuracy was very low. Now in my mind, you experiment, you fail, you take learnings and move to the next case. But sometimes in organizations, large organizations who are difficult to change, and managing that change, such cases become a challenge. And that's why I still say we are still at proof of concept. There has to be leadership. What is the right word I will use? There has to be a leadership impetus behind this, and then I think that change will happen.
Perfect. No, Anil, that's great. Great points, and brings us exactly to where we want to go in terms of the next set of questions, right? Which is, and by the way, folks, I've not seen anything in the chat window, so I'm just going ahead with the questions I have. If you need me to really ask something, go ahead and type it in the chat window. But for now, what I want to say is, organizations. How are organizations set up, right? I mean, are AI analytics teams inbuilt into the fabric of the organization? Are they cross-functional? Do they work as centers of excellence? Do they work as consultants that people go and consult with sometimes? How close are they to the people that actually have the problem? So how is it in different settings, right? So let me start with Rajneesh first to see in the CRO services world with companies like IQVIA and others. How are these AI analytics teams set up? Are they distributed across the organizations? Is there a center of excellence? How does the marriage happen?
Right. Sure, Mahesh. And I'll try to summarize my observations based on not just where I work, IQVIA, but also in my interaction with several different pharma and sponsored companies. I think there are two ways to structure is in general is how I've seen it. Data science, almost every company in the world probably has a data science team now, right? In some shape or form. But when you talk about institutionalizing AI ML as a science, I think there are approaches like creating councils. So there's almost in all the large companies, there is a CEO level importance or priority to having a council that can, to Anil's point, right? How do you bring from top leadership the vision down to the grassroots? Innovation has to happen at the grassroots level. So that's one way. The councils will help set a structure. Centers of excellence are great for solving large problems, population database problem, epidemiology database problems like COVID-19, when we're looking to do global data reviews. I mean, centers of excellence help in that. So when you have large problems to solve, I think COEs are a great structure. You bring data science, data infrastructure, engineers together, go at a problem. But most often what you see is small pockets of teams or focus groups who are working on specific issues. And that's what we are talking about, right? When you say examples of AI ML, what comes to fore is problems getting solved at those small focus group level, where you're taking a particular specific business question, a problem statement, and bringing the science of AI ML to bear, right? So I think that kind of a setup is what I'm seeing in most companies within the healthcare space, where councils, centers of excellence and focus groups are helping bring some value.
Perfect.
And one comment on talent acquisition, I have to say this, I think when Anil brought it up, we're competing, I think, we're competing with the Googles and Facebooks and the Teslas of the world. So they're attractive because their problems are more evident. Actually, the problems in healthcare are much more pervasive. They're into our lives. So I think positioning our problem statements in a better way of solving healthcare, bringing important drugs to patients, that has to be talked much more, I think.
Thanks, Rajneesh. That's brilliant. I mean, it's okay if you don't find the right restaurant once in a while, but if you don't get your right medication, I think it's a bigger issue. You need to get people.
Great way to say it.
Thanks, Rajneesh. Funny, how is it at DRL? I mean, how is the structure, or companies like DRL, Sun Pharma, if you know about, like, if you can speak about Indian generics, how are they structured from a AI analytics group perspective?
Yeah, so I personally had the opportunity to work in some of the large COE structures, distributed business analytics teams. I've seen various versions of it. In my past consulting life, even before I joined Dr. Reddy's. And at Dr. Reddy's, we started off on the journey as a set of COEs. I set up the analytics COE, and also from there on we transitioned to a slightly different structure. I think Rajneesh brought up an important point. I can give you the short answer to that is it depends on the maturity of the organization. If the organization's own maturity, and I can talk about our own journey. When I joined 5-6 years back, at the point where we were, COEs were great because we couldn't hold so many people together if they were so distributed. A couple of data scientists lost in a 15,000 people organization would go nowhere, right? So that way, I think the COE structure really helped bring a set of common capabilities together at one place, and then created the excitement in the system with POCs, with pilots, a bunch of conversations, smart people coming and talking to them, etc., right? So that COE structures essentially create that critical mass to a certain extent. From there on, as we stretched, we kind of realized that the problems, as I was mentioning earlier, would be lost without a proper context. Are we solving the right problem? Is it a problem that the data scientists are excited about, or is it a problem that the business is excited about? And so this is the balance that we then have to strike, right? And so we started moving some of the people from here into what we call as vertical structures, and still loosely connected back into the centers of excellence, but they are now almost dedicatedly working on an R&D problem or a manufacturing problem or a commercial problem, still having a connection back to the mothership in some form. So this, I think, created a little bit more of folks who understand our language, but still are bringing something together, and then that seed grows within the organization. And a purely beautiful way to run this is to have the business teams solve their own problems and call on the specialists if they need some help. That's probably the most ideal structure. That said, we have left some capabilities in the COAs where there is two things, right? One is the economies of scale, that we can do data engineering better centrally, we can do data science better centrally. And the second thing is birds of same feather, in some way, right? A data scientist always learns better if he has like 10 more people, 20 more people to talk to and say, okay, this is a new Python code, this is a new model, do you know about this? So those functionalities, I believe, would always benefit from remaining in the COE, but more of what we call as business translation roles, analytics to solve business problems, create business impact, or quantify why this problem is important to solve. Those will slowly and certainly move into the business teams where they rightfully should belong. So that's where I see the balance and where they are. But yeah, I think the value articulation becomes very critical to the overall structure, because end of the day, this needs to be blessed with both money and sponsorship from the top, and that will happen only when the teams who benefit will speak about it and really feel it.
Perfect. No, thanks, Funny. Brilliant. I want to go quickly to Anupam, if you can answer within a minute to the same thing.
Yeah.
I know how the structures are for it. We heard about CROs, service organizations. Anupam, how does it work there?
I'll keep it short. So it's a combination of both. See, we need domain expertise in a particular domain, and we need technical expertise as well, right? It's a matrix model. So the domain expertise comes from small embedded teams, which are embedded into the core business that also work as sort of translators or evangelists. But the larger data science and AI capabilities sit as a horizontal underneath those settings. So it picks up domain expertise from embedded teams, but capabilities sit as a horizontal. So that's how it has best of both.
Okay, perfect. Brilliant. Sounds good. So the good news now is that we have a couple of questions. So I'm gonna take those questions and see if we have people that can answer it. So I'm gonna go to Anil first. Because this is a question that I think you might enjoy, which is around AI, ML, NLP based, essentially these courses around life science based problems. Do you think that this should be introduced at university level as a course or a certificate course? How do we get people to really understand these problems more and be better prepared to help us solve them?
I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer, but let me take a stab at it. Most of the life sciences course are either, if you look at it, are either physicians or a paramedical staff, or other extreme, you have pharmacists. They're very different kind of pedagogy is extremely different from what data science is all about, which is all about, if we say, modeling, mathematics, statistics, etc., etc. So whether these two pedagogies can marry each other, I'm not the expert to say that. But if somebody can build that kind of a solution, I think it'll be great, because that would build a pipeline into the healthcare industry for getting the right people who would have an understanding of the domain from both sides and competence around the analytics space. That would be my stab at it, but I look at my co-panelists if they have a view.
I want to go to Rajneesh next, given that he is a doctor and now in the digital transformation side. Rajneesh, what do you think? How do we marry these two?
I do have an opinion on that, yes, indeed. So I think more than marry, my perspective of having worked as a dental surgeon in the data science space for the last 10 years, I think there is, and these points were made in some sense before, if we can get some level of familiarity for life sciences folks on data science, just get them to get a bit more comfortable to at least listen to the data science outcomes. What that means is we have to move to explainable machine learning, explainable AI. I think that's a big concept which should catch up, in my view. For that to happen, these types of familiarity courses, if you look at massive online programs today, there's been a complete explosion of the number of courses and number of ways you can educate yourself. So I think there is a sense of requirement for getting explainable AI out there. Human in loop models, right? That people should understand that when we talk AI, we're not talking human out of the loop. That's manufacturing, that's car making, for example. So I think to get some level of a comfort so that we can embrace not to become statistics, we'll not all become statisticians, but we can at least understand and use the outcome of some of the data science models. I think that's where we could spend some effort. And this panel, thanks to 3AI, you, Mahesh, everyone, these are the types of forums that help do that. And this is adequate. You don't need a formal certification, I think, but some level of familiarity.
Perfect. No, Rashish, and I fully agree with you. You can't have too many statisticians. We need to be able to make our money, right? So, anyway.
Indeed.
So very quickly, Rajneesh, Anupam, any of you have a thought around this? Because I think this definitely is a bigger problem, challenge for pharma guys, because they are much more science oriented. What about for you, where you're running across the running very much more, let's say, AI models which are reasonably well known, but may not require that level of high domain expertise. What do you think? Do you think that some of these courses might help to build that level of talent and expertise?
I think industry and academia is realizing that the bilinguals, what you call, that people who can talk domain as well as AI, is a critical part of the ecosystem which needs to be built. So there are a number of universities which have formally started doing that in India, and for instance, Stanford Medicine, there are certificate courses which they are running to teach people how to look at AI, and essentially doctors go there to learn that. But in India, for instance, Goa Institute of Management runs a program specifically on healthcare, and they do bring in health informatics and AI into the equation. So there are some formal attempt which is happening to bring in AI into the equation, into the education. For simple reason that if you have to start thinking in a lot more innovative way, you by doing reading some online stuff, it takes a while, unless until you have a formal education in that, specifically if you are interested into it. So as 5 to 8 years back, if you go and see any MBA will not have a data science specialization. If you scan through the MBA courses in US today, almost all B school will have an AI course in there. Similarly, lots of schools which have a medical education attached with it, like a Stanford, like Harvard, are starting to think about can we build some courses which allows clinicians to start appreciating AI. And in my mind, it's almost like a general purpose technology. Today, tomorrow, so everyone will have to pick it either in terms of be able to appreciate it or be able to do it. I believe that's the first bucket. Are you able to appreciate it? The strength of it, what it can do and what it can't do. You may not know how electricity is produced, but you know that if you plug in here and push a switch,
it's useful.
So that's what is going to happen over a few years' time.
Perfect. Thanks, Rajesh. Thank you. Anupam, any thoughts from you?
I think aptitude is important. So I know there's a lot of interest in, getting these certifications for AI and ML, and everybody wants to go after that because it's the in thing, right? So a lot of people who do not have prior background want to go down that route. But I think these would help if you have the underlying aptitude towards that, quantitative aptitude, the ability to be able to program. So I think that in assessments comes through when we look at candidates who've gone through these certification programs. But I think that's my only submission in addition to everything that's been said.
Super. No, thanks, Anupam. There is a follow-up question to this one, which I'm not going to ask, which is around coding for 5-year-olds. And I think that would split the panel, so absolutely not going down that path. But there was a third question around AI having any scope in cutting down number of studies and so on. And I think there is already a lot of work in this space. For example, there used to be a time when you needed 12 or 30 animals. Now you need 6 because you're able to build better models. Tomorrow we may get to 3, and hopefully you'll get to a point where you need 0, right? So can you do away with a thorough QT study? You don't know. But can you do a thorough QT study with just 2 patients, augmenting strong models that you have? Maybe that's the direction. But that's a direction that we've already embarked upon. So that's definitely the future. But with that, what I want to do is we are 3 minutes before time, and I know a lot of us will have to jump off to other things. So I want to once again thank the panelists. This has been absolutely brilliant. You guys were fantastic. So thank you for all your insights. I hope you've given enough food for thought for all the people who are on the session, in terms of where we are going with especially AI and analytics in the healthcare space. 3AI, thank you so much for having these sessions, and please continue to do the great job that you're doing because this is sorely needed. So with that, I'll hand it back to 3AI.
Thank you so much, Mahesh, Anil, Fani, Anupam, Rajneesh. I would just say one thing, that there has been some impeccable thought processes and illustrative and anecdotal references and amazing insights which have come in out of this roundtable session. When I was closely listening to all the insights which the leaders here in this forum mentioned, absolutely wonderful session for me. I'm sure it would have been a wonderful session for the audience here. Thank you so much for spending time for this roundtable, and I'm really overwhelmed with the amazing insights which you mentioned. Thank you so much again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you to the fellow panelists and the attendees. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good day, everyone.